Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us again. This week, as I sit down with the leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Mr. David Granger, we're discussing youth and employment in Guyana. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
Mr. Granger, it's interesting, our topic this week, because last week we focused on education and the fact that education should be provided properly for all of our young people. Now, this week we're talking about unemployment, the fact that we have young persons who are employed and there are no jobs for them. If you can provide a link, sir, with the two, unemployment and education.
Well, there is a link because people go through a long period of education in the hope that at the end of it they could be employed and live fulfilling lives. The problem in Guyana is that although thousands of children come through our primary school system, the pyramid narrows in the secondary school system. A lot of people drop out. And many of those, even those who don't drop out, find it difficult to get jobs. So we are concerned with a mass unemployment problem. It's not one or two people who are lazy. There just are not enough jobs. Thousands of 17,000 children write our common or national grade 6 examinations. Most of them drop out of school. The majority of them drop out of school. And dropouts find it very, very difficult to get a job. So we are concerned with the education system, as we did last week. But we're also concerned with the employment of our young people, because this will lead to a lot of social problems. And to use a very strong expression, I think we're sitting on a social time bomb. I think if we do not pay attention to youth unemployment, we are going to have very, very serious social consequences down the road. So the two are linked, education and employment. And without proper education, it's difficult for people to get proper employment.
This is not the first time David Granger and a Partnership for National Unity are expressing concern over the fact that we have so many young people unemployed. Do you feel that you're being ignored because no jobs, there's been no spike in job creation from the initial stages of your call compared to now?
I'm not being ignored. I think there are some structural weaknesses in the economy, and the economy is not expanding fast enough to provide the jobs, particularly the manufacturing sector. And in a country like this, I would say the manufacturing sector is sluggish. There's some other areas which might be unattractive to young school leavers, for example, artisanal fishing and maybe farming. But it's in my view that if there is a modification of the education system, fishing, farming, and even agro-processing, small-scale manufacturing could be more attractive to young people. So I'm not terribly worried about the failure of the economy to absorb young school leavers at the present time. What concerns me is the failure of the education system to prepare school leavers for the world of work. I am confident that in a country like Guyana, once we have some changes in the education system, we can have more young people going into self-employment, and that itself could expand the economy.
Apart from self-employment, how do we force, if force is the correct word to use, how do we force the growth of the manufacturing sector?
At present, I would say that the best prospect in the short and middle term would be in agro-processing. I think in the long term, you might be looking for other forms of manufacture, maybe when you talk about the bauxite or manganese or the coal industry, you might be looking for other forms of processing. But in the short term, I'm looking at agro-processing. I'm looking to see a revival of the village economies. I'm looking to see more of our Amerindian communities getting involved in the market. Particularly, I think there's great potential there. For example, in the Rupununi, you might know that some of the schools are supplied with peanut butter and cassava bread from the very Amerindian communities. It might seem small, but what I see happening is that if communities are given, appropriate technology equipment, for example, cassava mills. A cassava mill probably costs about $500,000 or $600,000. It may be a lot to an individual farmer, but I think the banks could, afford to extend that sort of credit. But he or she could process a lot more cassava to make farine or other cassava products, cassava bread, than his or her father probably did 40 or 50 years ago. So it is my view that with agro-processing, we could open completely new areas of entrepreneurship and employment. I do believe that all of our hinterland regions, without exception, particularly 1, 7, 8, and 9, that is really from the tip of Guyana to the bottom of Guyana, we could produce agricultural commodities which are in demand in the Eastern Caribbean, in the hotel industry, and in the homes, in the households. I think we could produce fruit, vegetables, fish, and other processed foods. For example, we could produce things like guava jam, guava jelly, guava cheese, condiments, pepper sauce, that could satisfy the Eastern Caribbean market. But we need to have young people trained in this level of manufacture. I won't even call it cottage industry. It's micro. It's micro agro-processing. But we could carve out a market for ourselves in the Eastern Caribbean. The problem is, at present, that our education system, not deliberately, but eventually it alienates many rural and hinterland children from the economy of their parents. It becomes unattractive. If a child goes to school until he or she is 16 or 17 years old, it is hard to tell that child to go back to the farm and, a 1 or 2 acre plot of cassava. But if that child were given, the equipment, mechanical equipment, he or she could cultivate maybe 10 hectares and plant much more cassava. If he had a boat, he can take that cassava to the market. But right now, we are still basically, I don't use the term in a pejorative manner, but we are still basically at Corial economy. One farmer and maybe his wife will have a few plots of land. They grow some cassava, some pumpkins, some lemons, some oranges. They go to market at Kumaka and they try to sell the stuff. And whatever money they get, they buy some plastic stuff, clothing, and they go back to the farm. And it is really subsistence living. And we can do better with a better education system. I'm convinced of that.
I want to talk about self-employment a bit, and it may be somewhat linked to the micro industry that you just explained. Now, I've heard sentiments like, if I start my own business, maybe knitting or cake making or whatever the case may be, the competition is so great that the possibility exists that I may either fail at my business because of the fact that I want to be self-employed, or the competition is so great that I wouldn't make much money. And I'm not necessarily talking about the hinterland regions here, persons living on the coast. How do we help our young people to overcome that fear, to pull them out of that?
The fear is real, and I don't think that in all circumstances that fear could be overcome. Okay. I think that to avoid that sort of situation, the planners need to make different choices. There is a limited amount of cake anybody could eat. The number of curtains you can have in your home. So I think that there needs to be a little more imagination, in that people should be trained in fields where there is a growing demand. And there's always a demand for food. There's cake. You can have cake. It doesn't matter. You have cake today. You have cake on Sunday. But every day you need food. You need ground provisions. You need fruit. You need vegetables. You need meat. You need eggs. And what I see happening is that the education system should be geared to increase production in those fields rather than going into cake making and decorations and all that. 1 or 2 people may succeed, but most of them will not find a satisfying career, they wouldn't find long-term employment in that area. So what I see is that, particularly in the rural and hinterland areas, we explore the possibilities for producing agricultural crops and use those crops for agro-processing. I think that somebody producing, say, 100 bottles of pepper sauce or guava jelly every month is likely to find a greater volume of sales than somebody baking cakes. You might get a cake sold at a wedding or some other function at Christmas time, but in terms of employment for a large number of people, we need to go back to agriculture. Most of the ingredients of cake, I think, particularly flour and icing and all that type of thing, might have to be imported. But once you are producing, say, guava jam or guava jelly, guava cheese, you can be sure of support. There are more linkages. Okay. There's a farmer, somebody supplying the bottle, somebody supplying transportation. So you'll probably touch the lives of over 10 or more people if you get involved in agro-processing.
Coming off of agro-processing and self-employment, how can government, yes, I should use government, how can government possibly facilitate foreign investors? That's for those persons who may not have the courage or just may not want to be self-employed, to create their own businesses, run their own establishments. How can government make Guyana viable for foreign investors who can come invest here, thus providing jobs for young persons?
I would use foreign with a small f. Oh. I think that the diaspora wants to come back, but they want to come back in a stable society. They want to come back in a system of a governmental system or an economic system where there is not an exaggerated bureaucratic presence. They can do their business as long as they obey the laws. They should not be obstructed from doing their business. But I have met a lot of people in the diaspora, particularly in North America, who are prepared to come back and invest. I don't think we need to go foreign, like massive investments. We need to rebuild the confidence of the ordinary people in the economy. When a person comes out of school and cannot find work for 2, 5, 7 years, after a while, I think that person is likely or might be tempted to lose the work habit and get accustomed to doing what he's been doing for the last 7 years, which is not working. Maybe he or she lives on remittances from overseas, stay with the parents, but I think that gradually the independence is diminished. And I would feel that people should be employed literally as soon as they come out to school. And I think that the diaspora would be very happy to get involved at that micro level. I noticed that many people of Guyanese birth still love the homeland. And they left for all sorts of reasons. We don't need to go into those reasons now. But they would be very happy to come back and invest their money if they felt that that investment was secure and, of course, that they could make a profit. So my view is that we could make proposals, and the diaspora is very willing to support those proposals. They want to come back here, but they are very concerned with the political environment generated by the PPP and the security environment, which, of course, is largely the handiwork of the PPP as well.
Okay, I'm happy you mentioned security, because my next question would have been, because I know you do some work with the diaspora too. What are some of the, I know this program is not about crime, but if you can possibly specifically touch on some of their concerns regarding security.
The main concern is criminal violence. The main concern is that they be shot at, that they could bring back, hundreds of thousands of dollars and build an enterprise, and then it's broken into. We have 3 armed robberies every day. This is not something that they could ignore. And many of them would probably know a relative or a friend who returned from the United States and got robbed. I know somebody who, this month, August, on living at a certain village on the East Coast, who was robbed. I mean, this is armed robberies. These are people who broke into his home and terrorized his family, his female relatives who were in the home at the time. So people are very concerned about that. I think security is probably going to be at the top of their list of concerns. There might be some other concerns about, getting licenses to do one thing or the other, getting permits, buying land, but their main concern is security. You don't want to get shot at.
I don't think anyone wants to indeed. I'm not trying to excuse criminal or deviant behavior here, but how much of an impact does unemployment have on criminality in Guyana?
It's hard to make a nexus. So I would be the last person to say an unemployed person is a criminal. Mm-hmm. But there is some causal connection that persons who are desperate may be sucked into crime. There is evidence to suggest that maybe drug barons, drug lords have recruited young school leavers. At one stage in this country we had a long period of criminal violence. I say long period of time, but 6, 8, 10 years. And it is quite clear that many of the persons involved were quite young. I mean, these are under the age of 20. I think in some areas they were called the Taliban because, as you know, Taliban is the Arabic word for student. Mm-hmm. That's what it doesn't mean criminal, it means a student. So these Taliban were really students, young people. I think there is a connection, and I find it hard to believe that on the average, a university graduate with a good job would take up an AK-47 and go through somebody's window at 2 o'clock in the morning. The person who does that is likely to be unemployed in the formal economy, and perhaps might have been a dropout at school and might have nowhere to go educationally. So I think there's a connection. I'm not saying that all dropouts are likely to be criminals, but the director of prison did announce last year that 75% of his inmates were classified as youths. And another thing, and let me add as we're on that topic, it costs about $350,000 a year to maintain one criminal. And as far as I'm concerned, I'd rather put $350,000 in a person's pocket as a salary and say, look, you go out and live a life without crime, and you get $350,000. I think we're spending our money, expanding prison facilities instead of expanding classroom facilities.
In my next question to you, I'm going to pretend I'm a spokesperson for the current government, the PPP government, and
Please
I'm going
don't.
to say to you, but my government has put lots of initiatives and schemes and programs in place for young persons who can go and develop themselves to propel them into the world of work. Your response to that?
It is true that the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration has launched a lot of schemes, but it is my view that most of them were misconceived.
Okay.
For example, we don't even talk nowadays about the President Youth Choice Initiative and PYCI. I mean, a lot of, I think about $800 million was spent on this President Youth Choice Initiative, but the money was, it has not created jobs. Then there was the PYARG, the President Youth Award Republic of Guyana. Well, simply this was a copy of a Duke of Edinburgh scheme. And at the time, the decision makers in the PPP wanted to get rid of the National Service, and they invented a scheme. But when you look at what it does, it seems to be focused on tours, adventure, and that type of thing. Sometimes you see them painting road signs. That's all well and good, but it does not provide jobs. So there you have the PYCI, you have the PYARG. Now there is another class of schemes. Only this year, the Minister of Amrine Affairs, Pauline Sukai, launched something called the YAEP, I think it's called. It's for Amerindians, it's the Apprenticeship and Entrepreneurial Scheme, YAP. Now this scheme takes, young men, I think and women, some of them might be dropouts, and they put them through a 6-month program in which they do sports and culture, some other things. They give them $30,000 stipend. I think it is designed for like 1,000 Amerindian, mostly Amerindian from the photographs I've seen, from Region 1 right down to Region 9. And they've all given them all red polo shirts. I don't know if this is to counter the green wave that has been sweeping the country. But when you look at the curriculum, you realize that these participants are not being given the tools to have independent occupations afterwards. And it would be good to see what happens after they leave there. There are some other schemes like the YEST. As you know, the People's National Congress Reform was in partnership with the One Guyana Group in 2006, PNCR-1G. We went into the National Assembly as PNCR-1G. And the manifesto for 2006 elections proclaimed the establishment of something called the YES, the Youth Empowerment Scheme, and the PPP, jumped on it, and they created YEST. And they started training young people over the last 7 years at the Kurukuru Training Center. And there is a program, I think, in like motor mechanics, electrical wiring, and all that type of thing. And there are some other schemes like that. So you've got the YEST and the NTPY, that's the National Training Program for Youth Empowerment. I'm not saying these programs are entirely useless, but in general they are misconceived. I see no reason why you should have 5 government ministries running 8 different courses for young people. What we need is young persons to be given thorough educational foundation, for example, in what I call STEM, STEM, okay. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. They definitely have to have a good knowledge of mathematics and English. Even if, for various reasons, poverty or delinquency, they might have dropped out of school, get them back in the school system. Let them cover the curriculum so they could enter into a proper technical institute. Our recommendation, and in a partnership for national unity, and I would say this is an unshakable recommendation, is that every single region must be given an agricultural and technical institute. That is, there are 10 regions, there must be at least 10. I know that Region 6 has one, has a technical institute, Region 4 has a technical institute, I think Essequibo now, Region 2 has a technical institute. But my view is that every single region must have its own technical institute. All students are not interested in poetry. They're not interested in history. Some of them like to work with their hands, and we shouldn't stigmatize people who like to work with their hands. Some people are very clever, and if they prefer agriculture, if they prefer technology, if they prefer mechanical engineering, give them a break. But I want to see, and APNU supports the establishment of technical institutes, agriculture and technical institutes in all regions. So students will be able to learn appropriate skills to their region. So if you come from a riverine area, a farming area, you would be able to study subjects in that college, in that institute, which would enable you to be employed when you graduate. My fear is that at present, some students who are going through what I call these satin programs, and again, I don't want to disparage the students' efforts, it's just that they seem to have oodles and oodles of cloth when it comes to their graduation. But what I see is that we have a more business-like approach. I don't see that the Ministry of Home Affairs should be running an education program. I don't see the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs should be running an education program. Education should be run by the Ministry of Education. I don't think the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport should run an education program. So let us consolidate. Let us decide what is best for the student. Let us give that student what do you call a bankable qualification, something that he can go to the bank and say, hey, I've just graduated from the Borima Waini Institute of Agriculture and Technology. My father has, 10 hectares of land. I'm planning to go into planting cultivation. I've already gotten some equipment to make planting chips. I'd like a loan of $1.5 million. But you can't go with that present certificate from the Citizen Security Program for the Ministry of Home Affairs and say, look, I've just finished this Citizen Security Program. Here, Mr. Rohi's signature. Could I get a loan of $1.5 million? They'll chase you away. So let us give our students a sound education, and I'm confident that as a result of that, they will have a good career and they'll enjoy the good life, which I know they're all entitled to.
Finally, sir, national youth policy. Do you believe that if government creates a national youth policy, that would somehow help the proper job creation and help somehow to secure the youths, the future of our youths in terms of employment?
There's an old saying, invented by Dr. Peter. There really was a Dr. Peter. When we speak of Peter's principle, there was a person called Dr. Lawrence Peter, and he says that when you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And that is the problem with the PPP administration. It doesn't know where it's going, so it invents all of these little things, and they end up nowhere. Yes, I think if there were policy, that policy would be, I hope, as a result of stakeholders and other consultation, that policy would move you in a focused way in a certain direction. And I would feel that when they look at what we've been saying, what APNU has been saying about those 8 different programs, they will say, look, this doesn't make sense. Let us have a good program, give our young people a sound education, and let us move forward to giving them a long-term employment. I think it's a question of focus. I think it's a question of policy. And the national youth policy would be able to provide the basis for the long-term career development of our youths.
Okay, thank you very much, Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition, Mr. David Granger. This has been another edition of The Public Interest, and we were discussing youth and employment in Guyana. I'm Malika Ramsey. Thanks for watching.